a compendium of the book of Judges. The theme, defeat and deliverance. Date of writing, the 11th century BC. Judges takes its title from the fact that it records the activity of 12 men and 1 woman, designated as judges and raised up by God to deliver Israel in times of dissension and disunity after the death of Joshua. No one was capable of such leadership as Joshua had exercised. The fourfold circle, so common in Israel's history, was rebellion, retribution, repentance, and restoration, occurred repeatedly. Joshua is a book of victory. Joshua is a book of defeat. Joshua, the leader, had died, but God remained. There was no necessity for defeat. The judges were chosen from different tribes. Not all of them exercised jurisdiction over the entire territory of Israel. The influence of some was local. In a number of cases, their periods of administration probably overlaps. See chapter 2, verse 18. The outline of the book of Judges falls into 6 parts. Part 1, the review of the past and institution of the office of judge. Chapter 1, verse 1 through chapter 3, verse 4. The state of Israel at the death of Joshua. Chapter 1, verse 1 through 3. Judah's victory. Chapter 1, verse 4 through verse 20. Incomplete victories of Benjamin and Manasseh. Chapter 1, verse 21 through 36. Rebuke for disobedience. Chapter 2, verse 1 through 9. Wicked new generation. Chapter 2, verse 10 through 15. Raising up of deliverers by God. Chapter 2, verse 16 through 19. Leaving the Canaanites to test Israel. Chapter 2, verse 20 through chapter 3, verse 4. Part 2, 5 judges. Chapter 3, verse 5 through chapter 5, verse 31. Part 3, Gideon. Chapter 6, verse 1 through chapter 9, verse 57. Gideon's appointment. Chapter 6, verse 1 through 24. Gideon's life. Chapter 6, verse 25 through chapter 8, verse 35. Career of Gideon's son Abimelech. Chapter 9, verse 1 through 57. Part 4, 6 judges. Chapter 10, verse 1 through chapter 12, verse 15. Part 5, Samson. Chapter 13, verse 1 through chapter 16, verse 31. Samson's birth and early life. Chapter 13, verse 1 through 25. Slaying of the lion and Samson's riddle. Chapter 14, verse 1 through 20. Burning of the Philistines' crops. Chapter 15, verse 1 through 8. Slaying of 1,000 Philistines. Chapter 15, verse 9 through 20. Samson's moral weakness. chapter 16, verse 1 through 22. Samson's death, chapter 16, verse 23 through 31. Part 6, confusion of Israel, chapter 17, verses 1 through chapter 21, verse 25. Religious confusion, chapter 17, verse 1 through verse 13. Incident involving the Dantilans, chapter 18, verse 1 through 31. The Levites' concubine, Delilah, moral degradation, chapter 19, verse 1 through chapter 20, verse 17. Civil War, chapter 20, verse 18 through chapter 21, verse 25. These judges came about on this phrase: it was a time when everyone did as they pleased. And when we stop following God's will, word, and way and start doing as we please, we find ourselves in the statement that there is a way that seems right in our eyes, but the end therewith will be destruction. God and God alone is the ultimate judge.